you did some research on your house, because I'm going to tell you the whole house story, but did you?
Yeah, well, you buy it, you sort of get the year it's founded and built and plot was developed and that, and then I they give you the name. Sometimes the names pop up in the deeds, and so I did a little bit of research on them, and there was this one couple lived there from like the 40s through the 70s. And it was one of these things I was just sort of doing a deep dive into searching for their names, if you know what I mean, and the address. And these really amazing photos popped up of them in 1953, the husband and wife in front of the house, and it's the same house, but the front yard is completely different.
Totally.
And there's a huge Canary Island date part now, and at that point it's kind of like half the size. And it's the most sort of 1950s-y, her dress and everything, like sort of classic American 1950s sort of white people vibes. And, I came out of the army and he was a fireman around here in Echo Park. And so I found all these photos. There's photos inside the house as well, because there's photos from Christmas and a wedding. And it's and all the built-ins are still intact in the house, which I really like. But there it is. It's just Mrs. So-and-so cutting the cake, and it's just in 1955. It's exactly the same still. So that was kind of a lucky find. What about here? Yeah.
I had a gentleman who was sort of peeking over the fence, and I asked him if he was, what was up, and he was coming to see his childhood home. This is the house that he grew up in. From 1940 to 1955.
Whoa!
And I'll send you we became friends. And he's been back 4 or 5 times. And he's shared photos of himself. He was one of these guys with motorcycle and greased back hair, like you were describing in the 50s. And it's just a very sweet kind of thing. Because he sent me pictures of his family here in this house,
Oh, so it's the same thing. And it's that's that door.
Yeah. And he's telling me about the neighbors. And
this is more interesting. Get more story.
Yeah. And speaking of story, I learned through these bizarre series of events that the house right at the top of this hill, I don't know if you've ever been up this street.
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Okay, it sort of stops and there's a house that's sort of made out of stone, like concrete, and then you take a right to go up to the park.
Yeah.
The house sort of dead ends, and then there's a house right there.
Yeah. And I think, is that the one that's kind of, it's almost like a really weird facade? It almost looks like it's sort of...
stamped, concrete.
It's like sort of pseudo French chateau ground floor, but sort of concrete, and it's just a really old building. Yeah.
It is.
Not like anything else around it. Yeah.
And it used to have pillars.
Yes. And it just didn't somebody just buy it and sort of flip it in a,
So that house used to have there was another house behind it where if you go up what's Avon for just a short stretch and then take a right, there's a recently paved extension of Ewing, and then the house that's the other property, the other house on the same property has an entrance that's on the other side of the, that's on, it's not on Avon, it's on the extension of Ewing, and that house is built right into the hill and has the incredible view. But point is that that house had been squatted in by this couple, and the guy who was the squatter guy, for all of his faults, was a tech kind of guy who could research and found out that the family that owned the house was this communist family who had lived next door. That's what, he told me that the guy who lived here, who was their a child, knew of them, this Italian family, and anyway, the story was that the woman, when she lived here, was not allowed to build that house because you couldn't get a a building permit as a woman.
Oh, right. Oh, whoa.
Yeah.
Wow.
So she had to change her name on the form to a male version, but built that house. The point being that if you look at the house above that house that
Yeah.
we're talking about, it has this like lower floor that's like a porch salon kind of a space.
Right, I think I've
It
been
just-
past it. Is
yeah.
that the one where there's a house above it that's kind of ruined? Yes, I actually love that street. It's like
It's unbelievable.
well, the ruins are kind of fascinating. Yeah. Oh yeah, I
Can I
totally
say-
know the house you talked about. It's all
Yeah.
sort of got sculpture. Well, it used to have all sorts of hanging bohemian artsy bits dangling off it, and I don't know now. I've not been up there for a while, but
Yeah.
oh wow.
There's details that I don't want to go into just because of all of the legal stuff, but that house used to have so much character.
Yeah.
And you know what's funny?
No, I mean I totally know.
Yeah.
And it had all these little bits of sculpture and stuff sort of sitting
Yeah.
out front, and yeah.
So the house that just the levels of eras. That house that you run into, the bottom house with that facade, was occupied by Marilyn Monroe's final nurse, the one who found her when she was
LA. I love LA.
and like wasn't
So
allowed to like
wow.
call in while the Kennedys,
Wow.
like figured out what to do for hours and hours after she
Wow.
was. So it's just amazing stuff.
Wow. No, it's funny. I totally know that little windy street and the ruined house and the sort of jungly artsy house below. And yeah.
It's amazing how they've renovated it in this way that's just like they've wiped out all of the character.
Have they renovated?
I mean, if you go up there now, it's just like this looks like any.
Oh really? No, because I've not seen that. I'm just remembering the old one. Well, like not long ago.
Yeah, and there's still a unfinished mystery about the house at the bottom of the street.
Oh yeah, which didn't get demolished.
Didn't get demolished.
Not yet.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
And
that.
there's another house. Do you know when you go on Valentine here by the school, and then you take a little right and a left to continue on Valentine? There's that sort of Asian-looking complex with all of the anyway. That house is for sale, and there's an effort to get it
Right.
also designated
Right.
as a historic cultural monument.
I'm sure I'd know it because I've wandered around here a lot.
Yeah. I could describe it and you'd
Yeah.
figure it out, but tell me about what your house was. Is it sort of like a similar layout?
Yeah, it's like
or-
kind of Spanish style.
Okay.
Similar, it's probably a bit smaller than this. But what's nice is that all the sort of built-ins and bathroom tiles and even the kitchen tiles in fact,
Wow,
they're still
that's amazing.
untouched. Yeah, so it's like really perfect like that.
Oh my God.
I really like that. Yeah.
That's
But it means it's like all lots of little tiny rooms.
Tiny, yeah.
Because it's not like, it's just like tiny room, tiny room, tiny room, tiny room.
Yeah,
But that's good fun. Yeah.
that's cool. When did you buy it?
About 6 years ago, something like that. 7 years ago. Yeah. What about you? How long have you been there? Oh, 20 years, you said.
Yeah, right at 1999, and so 25 years around. And at that point, I'd been looking for a little bit, but felt like the prices had gotten out of my
Right,
range.
right.
And then my mom came into town and was like, let's go tour around that neighborhood that you were telling me about. Because a friend of mine was a substitute teacher who had gotten an assignment at Elysian Heights Elementary and was like, you got to check out this neighborhood. Because so many people back then had no idea this neighborhood was even.
Right. Yeah.
It was just people lived in Silver Lake or, over in Hollywood.
Right.
I mean, the people who were, young, upwardly mobile professionals or whatever.
Yeah.
Although this neighborhood has this other history of artists and
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
it's kind of. How long have you lived in LA?
Since 2008. And I was in Silver Lake.
And what brought you to LA?
Work, got a job. Yeah.
Right. Now that's what I'm really interested in is your work, because we've just met in the neighborhood and connected over our love of gardening.
Indeed.
But my sort of pastime growing curry leaf relates to your work, because you work in Indian classics. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah. It's kind of like, it's hard to define the period because it's not quite the same. You know, the way you sort of chop up like sort of classics and medieval in Europe, the century, the sort of time periods are different. But yeah, sort of classical culture, you might call it. I suppose.
All right. Well, I've just opened that up, and I would love for you to kind of like share, just for dummies. You know what I mean? some of the bigger, like texts and eras and religious stuff.
Right.
You know what I mean?
It's hard.
I know it's a crazy.
But no, I can give you a little mini
broad
overview. I mean, a little bit of a sort of flavour of, you know. So I basically mostly work with this language, Sanskrit, which is the name of the language. It's not a script. It's not sand. People sometimes think it's Sanskrit, which is not, and they think it's Egyptian or something. Kind of, which I understand. You know, I mean, I didn't know anything about it until I started studying it. Really. So Sanskrit, and in a way, it's a very ancient Indian language. The earliest things we've got written in it are from about maybe 1300 BC. So really old. But then people carried on using it. I mean, it evolved, and its usage evolved, and the kinds of things people wrote in it and what communities used it changed over the time. But it kind of carried on being used. A bit like, say, Latin in medieval Europe. So, you get to something like, I don't know, like 700 AD, and
I went to Boston Latin School and had to study Latin
exactly.
for 6 years. But
right.
I was always, as a sort of high school student, resisting and kind of, why do I have to do this?
Right.
You know what I mean? But please describe how that change of usage, and was it something that was mostly in kind of spiritual stuff?
Well, that's again, it's complicated. In the beginning, it's largely sort of used for these very religious and ritual purposes, and then after a while, it really is used for all sorts of things, medicine, poetry, things like the Kama Sutra, like cookbooks, like all sorts of things. Philosophical stuff, legal stuff, At one point, everyone's using it for a lot of things. And then a little bit later after that, and especially more recently, it becomes much more sort of associated with religion and particularly with Hinduism. But you've got a period like about 1,500 years ago where like most communities, sort of educated people, of the sort of upper class probably are using it for all sorts of things. So that's in a way, it's that period that I look at most, when you've just got thousands and thousands of texts on almost any topic you can imagine. I mean, anything from sort of machines and automata to magic spells to help you do thievery, to like tons of more standard stuff, like loads of plays, for example, tons of drama, tons of philosophy, tons of medicine, tons of pharmacology. You've got cookbooks. You just got an infinite amount of stuff to look at.
I'm fascinated with medicine and pharmacology, and I'm gonna have to ask you to even back up even more, because I didn't get a lot of South Asian history growing up at all. And I had a good girlfriend in college who, and where I lived in Boston, there wasn't a large community, and I'm kind of got into different sorts of body work and nutrition, but so Sanskrit is how widely used is it nowadays?
Nowadays, still pretty widely used. It's very closely associated with you'll have people sort of studying it in school, a bit like you did Latin. and then doing sort of academic research using it, because if you say more recent periods, you can look at other languages, but if you want like a huge body of material from like 1,500 years ago from India, Sanskrit's your best bet, really. Tamil is another language, which I don't study, for which you have quite a lot of early stuff as well. But then, as well as that kind of more academic usage, it sort of has this sort of living usage. Yet again, a bit like in Catholicism, where you'd have the sort of academic study of Latin, but you actually, when you had Latin masses and stuff, you actually had sort of Latin as a religious language, and so that religious usage still thrives in, you go to a Hindu wedding, the rituals will be in Sanskrit, mantras and chanting might be in Sanskrit. I mean, a lot of devotional songs are not in Sanskrit. They'll be in things like Hindi and Bengali and stuff, when you hear people sort of singing these devotional songs, but still it's thriving. And you have kind of priest training colleges of various schools, in fact, where people will learn to recite it and chant it and use it. And actually, if you go to some of those places, the people there will be actually able to speak it. Like a sort of fluent language for them. But that's very much part of the sort of actual living religious tradition. Again, if you kind of compare it to Latin and Catholicism in 100 years ago or something, where it was kind of...
How did you... was there some sort of connection growing up that exposed you to studying it?
No, I mean a bit. I mean, obviously, I was in the north of England, and there's a lot more South Asian people from various countries originally sort of living there, so I was more exposed to South Asian culture. But that wasn't really why, really. I mean, I think what really happened was it's a bit like exactly what you say, is that I was doing philosophy undergrad, which was good, but it was really sort of snobby in a way. It was like everything Western all the time. Not only that, but everything, they'd be into sort of ancient Greek stuff. Even sort of later classical stuff, they were like, oh. And then medieval, they were like, oh. And then it was like, then it kind of gets good again in sort of Europe just a few centuries ago. And so I just randomly stumbled on a class on Buddhism, and it was all about the philosophy, in fact, and the Indian Buddhist philosophy. And there's multiple. It's not just one. Right. It's complicated. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. No one told me about that. I was like, no one told me about this. Yeah. No one tells you about this. And so I just kind of carried on taking classes with that guy and getting more and more. And then I discovered that there was this, not just the philosophy, that there's all these other things you can study that are, got all sorts of texts that people have hardly looked at, or maybe all this literature. I mean, who knew there were plays? I was like, there's plays. There's comedies. There's one comedy I used a lot of in this other project on alcohol and drinking, and it's probably I can't remember exactly how old. It's probably about 1,300 years old, probably South India, but it's in Sanskrit, and it's this sort of farce about this drunk guy. Staggering around, getting in a mess, and he's kind of a religious beggar, but his kind of the type of religious beggar he is would drink alcohol for sort of religious reasons, but it's kind of laughing at him as well. And he's got this girlfriend, and they're just both wasted, and he's lost his skull begging bowl, which he begs out of a human skull, and he's lost it, and he's freaking out, and they're sort of staggering around this town, getting in a mess. And that's insane. And it's just like this kind of comedy about drunk guy. And it's like, that's just a good example of these things that I had no idea existed in India. It's just that's why I like it.
I had a guest yesterday who talked about his renunciation and time spent, living, traveling, and detaching. And,
right. Oh wow.
Yeah, he's a guy I met not long ago at Canyon Coffee.
Oh yeah.
And maybe someday you guys will meet, but
probably because around here. There's the people who are always around and about.
Yeah. That's what's great about our neighborhood.
Yeah, it is actually very neighborhoody like that.
Yeah.
There's some people you never see.
True.
And you're like, oh wow, that's my neighbor. I mean, I do see my neighbor, but there'll be somebody that you're like, wow, you've lived in that house,
Exactly.
and I've never seen you. But then there's the people who are like, there's the people who like, get out on the street rather than just getting in cars all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. He's becoming a therapist. He's studying to be a therapist, and we had some really wonderful discussions about his work and the practice. Are you a Buddhist?
No, I'm not religious at all. It's kind of funny. Not at all. Not even slightly. I mean, I'm kind of interested in it. I guess it all informs my thinking.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that's also a bit weird. I mean, at least for me, it's a bit like that stuff is kind of my 9 to 5, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of very sort of like not like that when I'm just sort of I'm out of it's kind of odd when that kind of comes job rather than you. I mean, I'm really fascinated by it, but it's like I'll put that down now and just be completely like mundane person like. Yeah.
Where did you? So you said you grew up in the north of England. Where exactly?
In just outside a town called Leeds.
Okay.
Yeah. Pretty big city, sort of industrial.
So I don't want to like treat you like you're some sort of like a exotic animal, but like when you're growing up in Leeds, you have to take a test, right, to get into your college, right? And where did you end up going to college, and what was that? I mean, you were exposed, and then you became interested and pursued Indian classics. Maybe you can tell me where.
Yeah. So, the way it works is like you do some exams when you're 16. Well, it's all changed. My day, I don't know how it works now. My day, you did some exams when you were 16 in a variety of subjects, and then if you want to go to college, a lot of people would leave school then and just go and work. And then if you wanted to go to university or something, you'd stay another 2 years and do these other exams in a few subjects. But you're already quite specialised. And then you apply to university, and they'd often interview you. It's actually a big contrast to America, where like the faculty have no control over who gets in, but there the faculty kind of vet you. And it's not just about grades, it's like, just chatting to you and stuff like that.
So the faculty has a job as part of their job.
Yeah, well, not everywhere, but quite a lot of universities, they do it. And then if they like you, they give you an offer and you get good enough grades, you get in. So I did all that and went to Cambridge.
Oh, wow.
And did philosophy, which was good. But that's the other thing, because like in England, often like you'll just do a single major. Yeah. And there's none of all this kind of like general education classes and this and that. That's how I ended up doing this, is because it was like all philosophy all the time, non-stop, lots of logic and things like that. And I was like, I'm just gonna go and find something else to look at. Because it was just a bit dry to be doing that full time. So,
in where I went to school, you had to take it. There's the oldest public high school in America is called Boston Latin.
Oh yeah, actually I've got friends went there. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
No kidding.
I think you went there. Pretty sure I'll have to text them.
There could be Cambridge Range in Latin. There's another one in the Boston area.
Latin, in fact.
But Boston Latin is crazily historic in that. Like many of the signers of the Declaration of Independence went there. Wow. All these just gigantic names. Wow. And Harvard was actually created to continue the education of the students who went to Boston Latin.
Wow. Where is it?
It's right. You mean in Boston?
Yeah.
The Fenway area.
Yeah.
Kind of near the hospital. Brigham and Women's or Harvard Medical School. It's Avenue Louis Pasteur.
Is this some like old building and stuff?
Yeah, but it's moved around.
So
it's like 390 years old or something. Wow. 400 years old. Older than the country.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty cool. And
I'm pretty sure I got Fenway.
Well, I would love to meet them because there's a network that I've disconnected from completely. But it's interesting because one of my friends is the assistant headmaster, and they've had this whole shift in the way that they admit students because of all the concerns about standardized testing. And
Oh yeah.
so they for a long time you had to take a test to get in. Then there was this major kind of like attrition. So you would come in with a class of 700 people, and by the time you graduated, it would only be like 250 people who could make it through because it was 7 to 10. And but the rest of the city didn't have that, so kids from all over the city would get bussed in there, are still getting bussed in there, and a lot of the other schools sort of collapsed. Like there's just a pretty troubling issue with quality of public schools in the city, besides these sort of few exam schools.
Right.
What's happening in England?
Don't know. I've not lived there for a million years. I don't know.
But that system you described is still the way that people...
I think that's more or less still how you get into university.
Yeah. I kind of want to mine you, and I want to mine people I talk to for stuff, because I learn a lot and I can retain it, because I can just say, maybe there's that subject that we were talking about that when you studied philosophy, did you specialize?
Not really. I mean, like I said, it was already very narrow the way it was set up. It wasn't like there's a huge choice, which is why I discovered this Indian stuff. It was made, you could do a little bit of stuff like Aristotle and Kant, but mostly it was 20th century Anglo-American analytical stuff.
And who are
because the way that's where Cambridge was famous for that, so it was like a lot of it had actually been written by people there, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So, who are the big names in that?
God, honestly, I can't. I'm not joking. I'm talking like 1990. I don't remember. It's sorry, I'm not being evasive. Literally, kind of. And also, it's like it was really good, but it's not like I kind of kept up with it that much. If you know what I mean. It was like that was good, and I'll move on now. I've not really thought about it much since.
And USC is your department. Are you kind of like the guy for your field, or are there other folks at USC who are doing the same thing?
For kind of ancient Indian stuff, I guess I'm the only person that's doing video. There's other people that do more recent stuff and sort of slightly more recent history, very recent by my standards, but not that recent by everyone else's. But yeah, for my kind of stuff, it's pretty rare generally. It's not like, especially in America, universities don't often have a ton of people doing ancient Indian.
It feels like they're, I mean, with the global economic kind of changes afoot, it feels like there's going to be more and more folks who are going to have to familiarize themselves with that part of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, especially for more. I mean, I think what I do is really interesting, but I feel like people should know more about modern India, or say 19th century, 20th century India. And there are people teaching that, but I feel like you could very much have more.
Yeah.
Because on a given year, so and so will be on leave, so and so will be teaching this at a special course.
Right.
So it's like it's quite easy to be when there's not many faculty. It's quite easy for the student to sort of the whole time they're there wasn't much offered because people are on leave, finishing a book, doing this, or I don't know. So
I want to kind of get into some of the interesting nooks and crannies that you've come across, but our former mayor Eric Garcetti is now the ambassador to India.
Oh yeah.
And he used to live right around the corner.
Yeah, I remember hearing that. Yeah.
And he's always been a real kind of clean, green tech innovation economy guy. So I'm really kind of hoping at some point that I can get him on a Zoom call to talk about what's happening over there. But you're can you tell me a little bit about the stuff that you, because I'm like you're describing plays again. I had no idea that there was a play.
I didn't. I remember I was like, what? Yeah. There's serious ones. There's sexy ones. There's romantic ones and comedy ones. Yeah. My stuff. Well, I was recently interested in philosophy, but then I discovered all this other stuff, which was, especially then, people were studying that less. People are doing more on it now. These, things like I said, well, for example, I discovered there was all these perfume recipes.
Recipes.
Yeah, and incense recipes, and I was like, that's kind of interesting.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got this whole aromatherapy thing.
Exactly. So I was like, and so I got really interested in that, and if you spend time in India and going to Hindu temples and stuff, you're like, oh wow, it's kind of a big part of traditional life is garlands and incense and stuff, and so I worked on that for quite a while and looked at those texts and those recipes. And
were they sort of like? I'm fascinated with the medicine stuff, but were they sort of intoxicating or?
Sometimes they'll have the medical texts for specific reasons to do with, because it's like this sort of humoral medicine, and they can kind of balance and sort of calm certain humours, but that's not the main use really. I wouldn't say they were generally medicinal. A lot of the herbs that you'll have in perfumes might crop up a medical thing as well, but for different purposes almost. But the actual, when you look at the perfumery texts, the ones that aren't medical, they'll please you, which is, or they might kind of inflame lust.
Right.
So they'll just be delightful, or they'll inflame lust, and in say one case, they kind of calm anger. So I mean, if they can cool you down as well, because you think it's a very hot country. There's this whole obsession with. They're very into cold and moist. They're very into cold and moist because there's no air conditioning. Well, they had all sorts of they had things where you'd wet these screens made of vetiver roots, and they still have that in fact.
There's like three things I want to put a pin in right there, because I find some things that I just come across natives stimulating and maybe cognitively stimulating. I think wouldn't it be neat to have some of those things around the elementary schools? Some of the sages.
Right.
It's like the Cleveland sage. I find that to be kind of interesting and stimulating.
Right. Yeah.
And there are these other ones like chamomile that I've had tenants who just threw a bunch of chamomile seeds in the backyard, and it was calming. It was wild. It was like
you should try and grow that.
Yeah, and that'd be a neat thing for have little sections in the schoolyard where kids who are having issues with hyperactivity could go to the chamomile patch, but I'm actually quite obsessed with air quality.
Right.
And I'm trying to figure out different ways to help people, clue into the issue of air quality, and just like indignation's not going to probably do it, maybe there's another approach to convincing people that there's plantings that we're gonna try and use to tune you into this fragrances and whatnot. That's so wild. What about I think you mentioned a long time ago that the stuff around, is it alcohol?
Yeah.
A lot of that.
Well, that's another project, a big project that it was just looking at the history of alcohol in sort of South Asia.
I got a quick question. Is there any kind of similarities or differences in terms of people's struggles with alcohol?
It's hard to know in a way, because if you this is a general issue with all the material I look at, is that it's often really old. It's like 1,600 years old.
Wow.
But it's very sort of formal and artificial as well. And so the people writing it will have been educated in this very traditional way where they had to sort of learn very specific sort of patterns and forms, and there were these models for like, this is how you write a poem like this and a poem like that.
Got it.
So they're not necessarily, we don't have things like hyper-realistic diaries from that period. You'll have these, you'll have a sort of praise poem of a god or something like that, or and even in medical texts, they're often based on earlier ones. They might be innovating, but they're kind of almost hiding the fact that they're innovating by pretending to look like they're very conservative.
And not as much sociological research.
Yeah, so you don't really get a very vivid sense of exactly what was going on in society. But when they do talk about bad things and drink, what do they talk about? There's this general idea that it sort of releases inhibitions, and it confuses you like your perception. Like you'll say this microphone, I'd think it was a plum and try and take a bite out of it. So there's that kind of confusion. Or you confuse right or wrong, or so you sort of think a king is a servant and a servant is a king, and you talk to the king like he's a servant, and there's this confusion, which can be funny and it can be sort of sexy. It's sort of almost like it's almost like tripping when people, couples might do it, or people might do it in a sort of pub. But it can also obviously go really badly wrong as well. So that when people talk about it going wrong, often it's that they make a really stupid decision or say something really stupid. And then there's an idea in medical texts of sort of disease called, it's kind of related to sort of excessive intoxication, and that yet again it's not presented as a kind of addiction type problem. They do have this concept of being very attached to something, but you can have that for all sorts of things, this attachment.
It also doesn't have the same sort of I don't know whether the fact that for us it's so tied up in capitalism and advertising and so much socializing happens around alcohol.
Yeah, exactly. It's a completely different world. The economy of it's very different as well. But with that medical thing, what's interesting is the sort of conclusion when you have it. It's not like, you're drinking too much, stop drinking. It's like, no, a person with your constitution should not be drinking stuff made from rice. You should be drinking stuff made from sugarcane. And so you just got the drinking wrong, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So the cure for it will often be
different.
Diagnosing why their drinking's making them ill. And then you kind of go, right, okay, you've got to be drinking sugarcane wine and lots of black pepper or something like that.
Right.
You were drinking, I don't know, rice, wine and cucumbers, you know what I mean? Like, no. So that's kind of what's interesting, is the cure is more booze, but just the right booze. So it's clear, it's not alcoholism, you know what I mean? It's definitely not the same condition, you know what I mean?
Was growing up in northern England, was alcoholism a big sort of social problem?
Yeah, probably more than I realised. You're young, you don't necessarily know what's going on, and looking back, you're a bit like, I think that person.
Right.
But it's quite a boozy place. A bit like Boston or something. It's just probably very similar to Boston, that sort of pubby, slightly beery culture, you know what I mean? Probably very similar, in fact, yeah.
So we talked about perfume. You recently traveled back and you took note of some of the ways they use curry leaf. And you mentioned specifically one of the sort of breakfast recipes.
Yeah, well, often, there's a lot of things people do with it. It's bigger you get it all over India, but you see a lot more of it. It's more sort of ubiquitous for cooking in South India. And often the basic way you use it is you fry leaves in sort of hot oil and then you'll add other things, maybe like black mustard seed, maybe cumin, a few chilies, and then you've got this flavoured oil, which can be the base of, say, a vegetable dish, or you might pour that on some lentils, a kind of puddle of oil on top of this kind of flavoured oil. So it's kind of often this sort of tempering oil is the thing. But yeah, there's that dish which I was sort of in the central part of India. Well, I mean, you get this dish all over, but it seems to be very big there. This stuff called poha, and I mean, you get it all over. I mean, I've had it all over, but I seem to run into it more than normal there. And yeah, it's a part of that. So you kind of fry some peanuts, put them aside, and then you maybe fry a little bit of red onion and some of these and a few spices, maybe like black mustard, can't remember what else, maybe a few green chilies, and then you take this, and turmeric, and then you take this, so you've got this flavoured oil, and then you take this, the stuff that is called poha, and it's basically they kind of, I don't know exactly how they make it, but I assume they cook rice so it's soft, and then they put it through rollers so it's flattened, a bit like a cornflake or something. I mean, it's not like a cornflake, but it's like a sort of flat thing. And you wet that, so you sort of dunk that in water and let it drain. And it doesn't really hardly need cooking then because it's so thin, you know what I mean? And so what you do is when you've got this flavoured oil, you put this poha stuff in and you sort of toss it all around and sort of use almost like a salad dressing. You sort of dress it with the oil and cook it a bit and heat it up, get it hot. And this, it's a really good sort of sponge in a way it's got a really high surface area, this sort of starchy stuff. And so this gorgeous oil with all the sort of stuff in is on that, and you just have a big mound of that. And what's interesting in that, and I'd never seen this before in that central part of India, so towns like Bhopal and Indore, they're famous for, and you get it elsewhere, but it's particularly well known there, is you have it with jalebi. You know jalebi. Jalebi is that thing that you'll have maybe had it. It's you kind of get a kind of batter and pipe it in kind of like little spirally patterns in hot oil, and it's kind of orange, and then you soak it in very, very sweet sugar syrup. So it's a kind of quite common Indian sweet. You'd get it easily here, and it's really dripping with syrup, incredibly sweet. So you'll have this kind of very savoury poha stuff with this chunk of super syrupy jalebi on it, which is just a really weird. I actually loved it because I haven't got a sweet tooth at all, but I was like, oh, this is like really cool. This is just a strange contrast, yeah.
I'm sort of trying to figure out how much of sort of just background to ask you about around like Indian sort of the continent, just because I know so little, even though I am into this, so there was a time when Indian herbs and spices were like a currency, right? Like a very, very popular export.
Yeah, they were really, it was a major trade. I mean, I think at that point, a lot of economies, it was merchants sort of moving things around that was making people lots of money.
Yeah.
And places like Venice, you know what I mean, where it's just like they're like the hubs for warehouses for things like silk and spices, and it's like that's where the money was, sort of moving things around and trading them. And spices were a big part of that.
I can only imagine that, like the sensory experience of having access to spices when kind of English diet is pretty much,
yes,
which would make it seem so amazing. But I'm also fascinated with like how people must have become enamored with the potential health benefits and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important point to make. It's like a really good book about spice history. It's kind of really accessible as well. It's called Out of the East, and it's a sort of history of spice trade stuff. It's a few years old now, but he makes this point about the same point that like sort of spice, medicine, say perfume, you know, they weren't necessarily completely separate categories then.
Right.
So, you know, you'd be spicing, and this is still the case in India. That people, you can see this very much with chai spicing, for example. People will spice chai when it's cold in January. So if you're somewhere like Delhi, it could be bloody. It's a bit like LA. It can be really cold in January. It's not really that cold, but like it can feel very cold because it's just not full of big cozy furniture and things like that, and it can get pretty cold. So, but like so in that kind of context, people will put certain spices into chai, and then when it's really, 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 really hot, they wouldn't do that. And then once I was in Jaipur, and I was talking to a perfumer, in fact, and it was cold. It was a sort of very cold day by the standards of that part of the world. And he got some chai, and he took some saffron oil, some essence of saffron, and just dipped a little sort of toothpick into the saffron oil, and then just dipped it into all the chais, and so this little oil of saffron sort of spread out on top. Beautiful, in fact. Very fancy way to serve chai. No, that's not standard. But he was a perfumer, so that oil was being sold as a perfume, but he was like, saffron's warming, you see, so he was like, this will really warm you up. But why was he selling it? It was a perfume. But you would, conversely, in the same town, Jaipur, I was once there in June talking to another perfumer, and I said, have you got some saffron oil? And he was like, yeah. I was like, well, because typically these perfumers, they'll put a bit on the back of your hand so you can smell it. And I was like, well, can I smell it? And he was like, well, I'm not putting that on your body now, because it's like, you know, 1 billion degrees out, and if I put this on your body, it'll make you ill, you know what I mean? So that shows how you've got perfume, medicine, and putting it in food, and it was like that in Europe as well, but different systems.
So I mean, there's environmental cooling, and it kind of scares me to think that air conditioning is going to become a big thing in India, just from an energy standpoint. And then there's stuff you can, ingest to help cool you. And I wonder if some of that stuff that they figured out could come over here. But have you been hearing about how they're trying to adjust to the crazy temperatures we're hearing about them having over there? Like, is it, they're obviously, I've been hearing having like just these heat waves that are even unprecedented for them.
Yeah.
And it seems like that could really shut down an economy. And are they struggling with that?
Yeah, it's pretty bad. I mean, like, not the whole country is affected as badly, but there's some parts of the country get incredibly hot in the hot season. So the way it works is you have winter, sort of these sort of wintry seasons, which is sort of cool, a bit like LA winter, and sort of dry, and then you have spring, which is sort of pretty nice, can be pretty warm but nice. And then you have the hot season, which is like sort of May, June, and it's ridiculously hot. Then you have the monsoon, and it cools down, which is sort of probably around now. And yeah, the rains have started now. So it's a different cycle, but the hot season, that's when you have these stories on the news about the temperature in Delhi being horrific and things like that. I mean, the thing is, it's worse, but people have been dealing with because the hot season is always it's like we don't have anything like that. It's like it's probably like the desert here or something. It's like,
are there things they do about like gathering in certain times of day or like taking breaks at the worst part? Like, what are some of the things that, and this isn't obviously maybe related to your specialty, but just things culturally that they do to cope? that
I
maybe
think in that time of year, you do less. I mean, this is actually an
just
interesting
do
thing.
less, yeah.
Well, the way the American academic year is set up is like one of the best times for me to travel to India is then. It's just like, it's not great, you know what I mean? Especially if you're in certain towns. So it kind of inhibits me going or achieving anything when I go. And because, people just take it, it's a bit like winter in Chicago or something.
Right,
you just do less, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
that seems like something that...
And people get up early. Get up early and get a lot done before it gets too hot. You try and get stuff done before it gets too hot, and then, people sort of... Things wake up again later in the day and go on quite late at night sometimes.
I mean, their economy is like, I think, going to be growing a lot. I wonder whether I just wonder whether they're going to have major assimilation changes with getting into the kind of like capitalist way of life and
right. Yeah, it's kind of a big interruption, but I guess you could argue that sort of like New York has crazy snowstorms and it has a very disrupted winter, really, compared to say Barcelona. And it does it's like living in Boston. It does interfere with
it's funny. I've been
achieving anything in January quite a lot, really.
I've been, I'm sort of like hyper local, just partially because of my transportation limitations, but it's kind of interesting to watch on the national scale. We've got obviously the new vice presidential candidate, his wife is Indian. Vivek Ramaswamy was a presidential candidate, and Nikki Haley is Indian.
Right.
And it's sort of funny to watch, because when I grew up in Boston, there were very few Mexicans.
Right.
There were Puerto Ricans.
Right.
And moving out here, it's like, interesting. I know in India, there's always been a lot more of an Indian presence. And now in America, we're kind of going to be, I think, having a lot more of an opening and an awareness to India.
Yeah.
And it's happening in politics and other places. But is there anything like you notice at USC about it? Is it sort of like a little nook in the school, or
there's quite a large South Asian population. There's sort of people who have whose families, their parents, grandparents come from there, and then there's people who are actually just Indian or Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Nepali coming to study. Quite a big population. And that's where I'm always pestering people that we need to hire more people to teach about this. But everyone feels like, you should expand my little corner. So,
right.
So I'm not alone in that. But I do think there's more room for a bit of that, because there is interest in it.
And our presidential candidate.
Well, also, but then the people like you said, people who have no connection to it in terms of their heritage. Growing up in America, it's probably one of the... Well, Africa's pretty neglected, but you don't tend to learn much about, say, African history, do you? I feel like they could improve the quality of... Not the quality, the quantity of stuff going on in that world.
I can't believe I forgot that Kamala, because it's only been a day, Kamala Harris is South Asian.
Yeah.
Do you know her?
I don't know anything about that.
I'm
going to have to look into that.
It's just so funny because she's I have a friend who was on a Zoom call with like 30,000 other black women raising money and getting mobilization of,
Right.
that voting bloc.
Right.
And it seems like because it's such a swing demographic that it's gonna, there's. I was concerned that like maybe because she didn't perform that great in her run for president, didn't get a lot of traction. She might not be a strong candidate, but it actually seems like the conditions have changed a lot because not only has her experience become more, because she was a prosecutor,
Right.
and at the time when she ran, there was this sort of like big sort of reaction to the George Floyd stuff, and she couldn't emphasize her experience as a prosecutor and DA and attorney general.
Right.
But now that there has been this sort of like major shift in not only who the opposition candidate is, I mean that's not a shift, but in this sort of growing sort of concern about like law and order in cities,
Right.
she can actually lean into it, and she can sort of lean into her approach to Donald Trump as a convicted felon.
Right.
So it's just going to be wild. My point being that like as a person growing up in the United States, she leaned into her black background, joined a black college sorority, and as a candidate up until now didn't really emphasize her South Asian heritage.
Right.
Because as a culture, they're just, I don't know, there wasn't, I mean, America's got this like black-white thing,
Right.
Especially college campuses and the weirdness around how we teach our own history, But who knows, maybe her candidacy and potential presidency will bring more attention to that.
Yeah.
No?
No.
Are you allowed to vote?
No.
No? What do you think about, and what do you think about our two-party system compared to where you come from?
It's pretty two-party-ish in England, really. I mean, there's this third party that sort of sometimes is, well, during my lifetime, it's been pretty prominent sometimes and have been able to make a difference, sort of in terms of stealing votes and, complicating the picture, as it were. And then it sort of almost completely vanished, and then it's sort of been back again. Yeah, I think that works. I mean, it's working pretty well. It seems to be working pretty well in England at the moment.
What about Brexit?
Yeah. Well, that was a mess. Yeah.
What's going on over there? I mean, I sometimes feel just like a little bit in my tiny bubble.
Right.
And like, how's the economy over there, and how's the mood, and are there movements to sort of like reintegrate a little bit more after Brexit?
We've just started with this new Labour government, so exactly how that's going to play out. But I think a lot of people are positive that, I think even probably the most die-hard conservatives are like, that was just getting convoluted and messy, and they were just sort of embarrassing, backstabbing, self-serving, incompetent mess. I don't think anyone was impressed by them, and they've got so messy, sort of like laughably so, but not laughably because it was like all sorts of horrific things were being done and neglected, and so I think there's hope now. But it's that thing. There's a lot of things in a mess, and you can't fix it overnight, which is like the Labour are rightly emphasising. They're like, do not expect this to be fixed overnight.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to ask you one more ridiculously broad question, which is that do you have a community of folks from England here in LA that you?
No, not really. In fact,
Wow.
weirdly, most hang out with Americans. I know a few. I mean, let's say about 2 friends are English, maybe 3 that live here, but mostly, yeah. It was like that at grad school as well. There were quite a lot of Brits there, but I was friends with some. But it's like a
Where did you go to grad school?
Harvard.
Oh, no kidding.
That's why I was. Yeah.
Yeah, so you
Yeah, that's why.
I didn't even know that.
Oh,
See, this is what I love
that's
about-
why I just Boston talk.
Yeah. Wow. So that must have been fun as hell going to Harvard grad school.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah.
I lived in Cambridgeport before I moved out here.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Where did you live in?
Inman Square.
Oh, wow.
Well, first of all, Lower Alston when I first
Yeah,
moved there, which I actually really liked. In fact, it was very out
Yeah.
of the university thing.
Yeah.
It was more BU if there were
Yes.
students at all, but it wasn't really very studenty. The street I lived on, which was good in fact. 'Cause I
What
just
street?
moved to America and
That's all right.
I can't remember.
whole
I can't remember
part of
either of the
Boston.
streets, but then like in Inman Square, I was kind of pretty, near the in the centre, near the
Yeah.
supermarkets and the pubs and stuff. So.
There's my ex-girlfriend lived in, or her brother lived in Inman Square when he lived there. There's a sort of an Indian community there? Not much.
Maybe.
Maybe not.
I don't remember. Doesn't ring any massive bells. It's like, no.
Okay.
There was this good Punjabi Dhaba restaurant that did a good sort of, thali, you know what I mean, which is, where you get like multiple different things.
Yeah,
Which is I like, it's a much nicer way to eat Indian food where you have like sort of 5 or 6 different things.
What about Indian restaurants in LA?
It's not the best considering what
Wouldn't Echo
big
Park
city it
be
is.
an amazing place?
Yeah, to have a good
For anyone,
one.
yeah.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I think a lot of people, there's people don't know as much about it, about what to order and what's good.
Yeah.
I mean, if you wouldn't sort of go for the. I don't even know if it's open on an evening, but that India Sweets and Spices in Atwater is really good. If you go for their like lunch, breakfasty, thali, or anything they do is good in fact.
Do they still have the buffet style?
Yeah, and they have all sorts of other things you can get. I mean, that's really good.
That's so cool.
And then another one is it Culver City Way? It's called Mayora. That's really good.
Where is that?
I think it's in Culver City.
Culver City, yeah, I never get over there.
Yeah, that is good. That's like a proper good. It's really good in fact.
So do you drive a lot?
But considering how big the city is, that's like not a lot. I know there's others, but still.
Do you find yourself driving outside of Echo Park?
No, I stick around here, I walk everywhere,
Yeah.
and I get the buses, I take the bus to USC.
Oh, wow. You take the tube?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then I'll go to, if I go to Silver Lake, I'll hop on a bus, depending, if it's hot, I might walk, but if it's boiling hot, I might.
Yeah. No,
I walk it, I'd go downtown, I'll get the bus.
Yeah.
Going out a bit further afield, like a bar, I'll get an Uber, so
Yeah.
I don't really drive much at all.
That's amazing.
Buses, yeah.
I'm actually hoping that, because there's going to be this mad dash, there already is, to develop the area to the east of Echo Park Ave, but more so to the east of Douglas and to the east of Vince Scully on Sunset Boulevard.
Oh yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, 'cause there's a lot of sort of bare hillsidey stuff there. There's some nice old housing. I like those ones with little
I do
houses.
too. I know.
Hopefully they won't all get crushed.
I mean, they used to move houses, and a lot of them, there are big lots with small houses on them.
Yeah,
And it's one of these things. Who knows whether I would think differently if I lived in that house,
right?
or in that neighborhood, like Angelino Heights. They're particularly concerned about big developments and people taking their parking spots and stuff.
Yeah.
But I just feel like we are in this unusual position of having an underdeveloped neighborhood right next to downtown, along a transit-oriented corridor, while we're in a housing crisis.
Yeah.
And we can create a neighborhood which is what everybody in LA claims to want, which is a walkable neighborhood.
Yeah, totally. You could walk to downtown.
Yeah, that's my
totally. From there, you can from here, but like there,
I know.
now.
Yeah, it's like that never lines up.
And then there's that bit between Alvarado and Glendale, which is just all, supermarket car parks and things. Which obviously I have no
You're
idea.
talking about Sunset?
No, sort of
on Glendale.
Yeah, Glendale Alvarado, sort of where they join.
And not only that, it's in a valley, so that if you went high,
I mean, it's
you
all
wouldn't be blocking
supermarkets, so I don't
people.
know if that you can. But,
Well, it looks like
there's a lot of very large spaces there that never really had much in them.
No, I know.
And you're like, that's an incredibly massive area.
Yeah.
But who knows? Who knows how it all works?
That's an area that a friend who's been involved locally has talked about being a potential place. There is going to be a Sprouts going in to where Rite Aid was.
Oh, what?
Sprouts.
What's Sprouts?
It's kind of like kind of between Trader Joe's and Whole Foods.
right.
So like quality organic at
in that
as
Rite
low
Aid.
of a price
that'd be good.
point. Yeah. Hope so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I mean,
I didn't know
I
that.
love the experience of shopping. I think I recently was telling my friend Will, when you go into like 365 or Lassens, it really does create a resentment on my part economically that this stuff is so good,
Right.
but it's so expensive.
Yeah, well, you've not been to Erewhon, so
or Whole Foods,
Yeah.
And it creates this like class resentment,
Right.
and it's not just like that's something that I want to buy. It's like food, it's health.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No. It's like ridiculously expensive just for.
Yeah, and the stuff that we put in our bodies is what we become, and health and the whole like super processed food thing is big, I mean, so anyway, I don't want to take away too much of your day. It's really been fun talking to you, and I want to look at this and then be able to sort of like find other things that I can ask you about at a future date.
No.
I find and I want to just chat with you outside of this and learn more
see your
about
place in the garden finally.
Yeah. Well, when the pomegranates are ripe, you'll be getting plenty of those.
Yeah. No, I didn't realise how many curry plants you've got going. Do contact. Actually, what is it? I know. Is it Artesia? Is the big South Asian part of town? And there might be even bigger.
I mean, I feel like it's one of these things that ought to be.
Sunset Nursery will probably want.
That's a good idea.
You know what I mean? They'd probably be like. Because actually, I remember them telling me I once bought a coffee plant from them, and they were like, "Oh yeah, well, there's this." It was a similar situation. They were like, "Well, we used to have loads of coffee plants. There was this guy who just loved growing coffee plants, and he had a corner of his yard full of coffee plants, and we'd sell them,
Yeah.
And they'd buy them off him and sell them. So it's not like they all. I don't think they necessarily get all their stuff from sort of huge wholesale things. And the Indian supermarkets would absolutely, I'm sure, unless they've already got a million from somewhere else. But typically, when you go in there, they'll have one, and it sort of goes really fast.
Yep.
But if you had, they'd be really into it because they're hard to get.
Yeah.
No one sells them. They were illegal at one point, wasn't there? Something.
There is an import restriction because there's like an.
But if they're grown from seed here, and I don't think you can sell them now.
Yeah.
At one point, you couldn't even. I don't think you could even sell them. You had to sort of get them on Craigslist and some on black market curry plants. But I think you can just sell them. Because I got mine from Logan's Gardens. Logan's, those guys in Silver Lake. They run a little nursery.
Where's that?
Well, you can't visit the nursery. They show up at farmers markets.
Oh yeah.
Well, maybe you can visit the nursery, but I mean, I've never done it. But
what's funny is
mine. I got one. It was about this big, and it was from them. And I was like, oh my god! And I just grabbed it, and I was like, not putting this down because
Yeah. Indian sweets and spices. Maybe 10 years ago, I told them, I have these, and they were like, really? Can we would sell them. So they do seem interested, and I'm crying.
Size, they'd be like, because that's really good to go. You know what I mean? You can't. The little ones people might be scared of, but it's just like dig a hole, put it in.
Yeah. I'm trying to grow enough of them to this size.
Yeah.
so that I can. And it's not easy with the space limitations.
No, these look great though.
But you know what? The gentleman yesterday I interviewed mentioned something that I didn't know. And I want to actually I know I was about to wrap up, but just one more thing. Can you tell me about Tulsi? Is that a plant that's...
Yeah, that's a type of basil. There's various types of Tulsi, Tulsi is actually a sort of a goddess. There's kind of whole mythology about who Tulsi is. But Tulsi is very associated with the god Vishnu and sort of the Vishnu side of things, if you know what I mean. So Krishna will be part of that.
I don't know.
It's like a
all
constellation.
What you mean.
Think of it like as a kind of constellation. There's lots of gods and they form clumps. And it's a sort of Vishnu constellation. And Vishnu takes different forms, and then there's there's wives of Vishnu and things like that. And Tulsi's. So if you go to Vishnu-related temples, they'll sometimes have garlands of Tulsi, but more importantly, a lot of houses will have this little it's like a little pillar square plant pot. You'll have it in front of the house or somewhere in the garden. And you'll grow Tulsi in it, and it's sort of auspicious and holy, and you might even worship it with a bit of incense or a lamp or something like that. So, but then people will talk about there's different types. They'll be like Krishna Tulsi and Rama Tulsi.
Well, I've got some research to do.
And you can eat it. You know what I mean? You'll go to a temple sometimes and they'll give you a Tulsi leaf.
So this daggone plant, I believe, and just intuitively have sensed, has really quantifiable medical benefits outside of just how to cultivate, prosperity. I mean, they've done all this stuff about how it's got incredible antibiotic, which is a weird one, because that sounds like some sort of a, what's the big one that we talk about? I forget what it is. What's the big antibiotic they came out with that was sort of like the life changer? Salk. Penicillin. Anyway, but it's also got anti-inflammatory, which is much more sort of related to a lot of people's growing awareness about inflammation problems and how it's sort of like a meta issue. But they also say it has anti-cancer, anti-progression of degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, and ALS.
Wow.
So I've got this journey of learning how they're going to start to study it more, because the whole thing about the name of it and the restriction on its import has just prevented it from having that kind of
and people don't know what to do with it. I mean, that's the main thing is, because very few people cooking, unless people are of South Asian origin or heritage, I'd say not that common. Americans they might make a bit of Chinese food, they might make a bit of Italian food, Indian food, because in England a lot of people make Indian food who have no personal connection to India at all, you know what I mean? But people here are a bit I don't even know where to begin with that. But it's easy. That's sort of a basic thing where you fry it out with some mustard seed and a few chopped green chilies and make an oil, and then put cauliflower and potatoes in it or something. You know what I mean? Very easy.
Yeah.
Turmeric as well.
Garam masala. Is that a mixture?
Yeah, actually that's significant because the word garam means hot.
Okay.
And masala just means a spice mix.
Gotcha.
So it means a heating mix, but it's not necessarily spicy. Sometimes it has things like pepper in. But that's heating very much in that medicinal way.
Yeah.
That it sort of is the things in it are all warming.
Right, and I mean, I guess so. What I want to explore is that people who live in sort of scarcity sometimes figure out how to use things that will prevent disease and inflammation with, you know, the spices and plants that grow around them. But what I want to sort of, because I find this to be mentally clarifying when I have a tea with it. I mean, a lot of people with spinal cord injuries struggle chronically with infections. I find this one.
We need a new battery.
Is it dead?
Nope. You got like the smallest bit of charge.
Okay, good. I find that this really helps with that, and it helps with cognitive, because I think a lot of what we deal with when we're dealing with foggy kind of thinking is kind of, you know, a low-level infection.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, it's really so fun. So fun. So